recovery. Like I was, pretty much a junkie from when I was 13. I was shooting heroin by the time I was 16. So essentially I became wired for protection rather than connection. My whole nervous system became oriented and wired for survival. And so, using drugs like ice and hard drugs, it's like everyone was scared of them.
Yep.
You'd feel them kind of judge and be a bit fearful and weary of you. That was part of it. I created an image of myself that I projected out onto the world, and that image became, my way of self-referencing as well. This is who I am. But the whole thing was a response to the trauma that I'd experienced as a child. And when that image was being sent out into the world, people would then project it onto me. And that gave me like walls, it gave me a buffer. It made me feel safe because I lived within that identity, and people were scared of me. People were scared of the people that I knew. They knew not to do things to me and rah, 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 rah.
How does somebody that's like 13, how do you get to that place where you're like down to do that? Hey guys, just a real quick one. We're moving and investing heavily in a video first podcast. So the main channels that we're going to be posting on is YouTube and Spotify. So if you don't follow us there, we would love if you jumped over and chucked us a follow or subscribe to us there. Also, because we get shadow banned on social media sites, just because of the nature of our content, we're going to be really heavily investing in our email newsletter as well. It's called the Good Gear Newsletter, a new dose of a different type of gear. So we would love if you subscribe to that, because we're going to have heaps of uncut, raw, unfiltered information on how to beat addiction, how to build your AOD career, and how to push for policy change in the alcohol and drugs space. So we would love that as well. And also, guys, for this episode, we talked to Matt, and he is involved in the Center for Healing, which is a training center around trauma and other embodied processing that is going gangbusters and has heaps of awesome reviews, and lots of people are enjoying it. So if you're a coach, therapist, or healer, or someone that works with other people that's looking to become more informed around trauma, this is one of the most popular trainings and courses and things that you can invest in to get better results and become more trauma informed. So use the link below in the description. It'll get you some benefits when signing up to their training. Let's jump into the show, guys. Peace. How are you, dude? What's happening? What's been happening?
Yeah, I'm good. Just work and kids and family and
Yeah, nice.
on recovery. Recovery is just kind of like living these days.
Yeah. So I actually want to talk to you about that a little bit. But maybe we might, like, in terms of how you think about, I'm doing quotation marks for anybody that's not watching, recovery, because it's such a generic term these days. But I maybe we just want to go back just to sort of, we had Matt on the show it was like years ago now. So to kind of refresh everybody, do you want to give us like the 3-minute snapshot of your story? And for everybody listening, like, it's kind of funny, like, not really. We might have actually met like a couple times, maybe, when we were like using kind of around similar areas. But I remember Matt as well from like the early days in recovery, from like recovery circles and stuff. And like, I don't mean this disparagingly, but Matt was like fucked up. It was like in a serious way. So yeah, I hope that just gives everybody a picture before you start like telling your story. Sorry, man.
Yeah, it's fine. I agree. I was, 3 minutes. Look, like, my story's like, it's not so much atypical of addiction. It's more on the extreme end of things. Something like most people who get into recovery, sort of like they spend some, maybe dabble in ice, or they use for a while. Like, some people have had a job. Like, I never had a job until I was 26.
When you were like sober and stuff like that, or in recovery?
And I didn't even get a job then because of my criminal record. And I dropped out in year 9. I never studied anything. I didn't know anything except using, Most people had a job or, and got into recovery. Like, I was, pretty much a junkie from when I was 13. Like, I was, I went headfirst into using. It's all I cared about. I was shooting heroin by the time I was 16,
Yeah.
and then did that every day for 10 years, in and
So
out of prison.
so can I ask, sorry to interrupt, like, because you're right, like it is just like an extreme sort of pathway. So how does and I know I asked you 3 minutes, but we'll just vibe and go with it. Like, how does someone just start, like, what'd you say, at 13 you started shooting heroin? Is that right? How does
No,
someone
I started shooting heroin when I was 16, but I started using when I was 13. Like I was smoking ice before school when I was 13, weed and all of that sort of stuff, dropping pingers and
Yeah. Pretty fucking extreme. So I guess maybe let's start there. At 13, how does someone, because I even remember like the first time I smoked ice, which wasn't until later than that, maybe 17 or something. It's a bit of a blow. But like I remember it being like, whoa, at first.
yeah.
This is like ice. Like how does somebody that's like 13, how do you get to that place where you're like down to do that
Like it
shit?
was so long ago, it didn't have the name it does now.
Yeah.
Like before it was like a epidemic, as they call it. It was before everyone was doing it. And look, like there's so much talk about youth crime now and like, 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds and 11-year-olds like getting in trouble and all that sort of stuff. It's like, well, I was getting in trouble at those ages. Like I already had that criminal
Yep.
mentality. And looking at my journey, it's like, well, I can see the various stages in my life that drove me into that brought about that mentality. Like I adapted to specific environmental stimulus, so I adapted to survive. And using drugs, that criminal mentality, that kind of becoming the bully was a result of things that happened earlier in my childhood.
Yep. Yep.
So, like I was quite severely bullied in primary school, for repeatedly like targeted. It wasn't just like a bit teased a bit, it was like
Yeah.
cornered kind of thing.
That's interesting. Me too. And I've never really spoken about that much, but me too. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And look, like, it happened repeatedly for 7 years, like, all through primary school, 6 years, sorry. And like waking up every morning with that knot of fear and
Yeah.
anxiety in my gut, like, oh, I don't want to go. Like, I don't want to go to school. I don't like, just that kind of like unbelievable angst. Like, I'm not safe.
Yeah.
And then being forced to go there every day and feeling abandoned by everyone who's supposed to protect me.
And did you tell your parents as well, like what was going on?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so for me, I don't know about you, but that actually made it worse for me. Because it made the bullying a bit worse at sometimes, but also I got extra anxiety, like what you're talking about, because like my dad would be like, what are those kids fucking say anything today? Shit like that. I'd just be like,
Yeah, that adds to that knot. So there's like an inner angst, an inner constriction, and inner contraction. A lot of people get it in their belly, like a no, and it kind of can show up as nausea. Like I'd always get belly aches and just feel sick and whatnot. And I told my parents, I told the teachers, and so no one really helped. Like, and the things they did to try and help didn't help. So I felt completely alone, and it resulted in this kind of hyper independence. Like no one can look after me, only I can look after myself.
Yep. Cute dog.
Yeah. And it resulted in this kind of personality and these personality traits that became oriented around survival.
Yep.
How am I going to survive? And this happened unconsciously. I didn't think that, when I was 12. But I remember, so I went to a private primary school. That's where I was bullied. And then when I went to a high school, I finally was able to change schools. My parents finally let me change. And I remember, like I put weapons in my backpack the first day of school.
Wow.
And it was that mentality of I can look after myself. No one's going to look after me. And it was like this part that's like, I'm not going to be bullied anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it was a survival adaptation. So my personality shifted from being the victim to becoming the perpetrator.
Yep.
That's the only way I could survive, because it's like I can't live as the victim anymore. It's too painful. So then an overcompensation happened within me. I threw myself headfirst into becoming like the most feared kind of criminal in the school. That was my mentality. Like, because
Yep.
if I'm that, then I'm safe.
Yep.
And I started making friends with all the people that were robbing people, that were going to juvie, that were smoking weed at the back of the Oval, that were into ice, and they were all a few years older. And it just snowballed like so quickly. It was like, this is the only thing I care about because it's the only thing that's going to keep me safe. And so when I was hanging around these, older people who were already doing this stuff, it gave me a sense of security.
Mm.
I
Man,
know.
it's so interesting you say that. Like those like moments when you're talking to people and their stories and like there's little differences, but it's similar. Like I was kind of the same when I started using drugs, like without realizing it, but reflecting on it, exactly the same. Like I was never like a tough guy, but I always tried to surround myself with those people and tried to act like it in some way.
Yeah.
Because it made me feel safe, got everybody like away from me, you know?
So essentially, I became wired for protection
Yeah.
rather than connection. I want my whole nervous system became oriented and wired for survival. And so, using drugs like ice and hard drugs, it's like everyone was scared of them.
Yeah.
You'd feel them kind of judge and be a bit fearful and wary of you. That was part of it, when I first started. It was like that, I created an image of myself that I projected out onto the world. And that image became, my way of self-referencing as well. This is who I am. But the whole thing was a response to the trauma that I'd experienced as a child. And when that image was being sent out into the world, people would then project it onto me. And that gave me like walls, it gave me a buffer. It made me feel safe because I lived within that identity.
Yeah.
And people were scared of me. People were scared of the people that I knew. They knew not to do things to me and rah, 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 rah. It kept me safe from being bullied again, so it all came back to an adaptation because of that. And so, this youth crime epidemic, they're also the victims of their environment growing up, so it's like, what could we call it? Victim blaming. If we're saying these 11-year-olds like, need to go to prison, there's something wrong with them, they need punishment. Well, that's looking at the symptom. What about the actual context?
Yeah.
About the cause, what creates this?
Yeah.
What causes someone to develop in a way that creates these specific personality traits and these behaviors? There's always a cause, but as a society, we're so focused on the symptom. It's like the drugs are the issue.
Why do you think people find it so hard to sort of understand that point of view and shift the fucking approach rather than just constantly hitting the same nail with the same hammer of like, got to arrest these motherfuckers, which, just kind of perpetuates the cycle, really, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's kind of because it takes away blame,
Yeah.
so blame. And so it takes away the victim identity for us as well. Like,
Yeah.
they're also the victim. We don't get to hold the position of being the perpetrator.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll hold the position of being the victim and making them the perpetrator. So then the blame doesn't hold up. It's like, it's not their fault.
Yeah.
But we have this need in us to make it somebody's fault. Because even if their parents were neglectful, it's not really their parents' fault because they developed in a way according to specific environmental stimulus that caused them to disconnect and unable to parent properly. Their nervous might be dysregulated, they might have trauma, whatever. Their parents might have been neglectful and they're just repeating the same pattern. It's like we are a product of our culture and our environment. And so, having to actually look at what's going on, everything would need to change because the issues are so much about cultural issues.
100%.
Even a fucking toxic culture, like so toxic, like unbelievably toxic. And it's much easier to blame the individual than to blame the culture.
Yeah.
Blame the systems that we live in. Like, I'm of the view that we all have systemic trauma, from living in these systems, that don't suit individuals' needs, that don't suit our unique kind of expression, that kind of shut us down, make us adapt and contort to fit in specific systems and boxes. And that causes our nervous system to orient around surviving this environment. And so if we're blaming the individual, we don't have to look at any of that.
Yeah.
No,
It's so interesting. It's even just like, like I was reading some shit the other day about like Genghis Khan and stuff like that, and like don't ask me to recite what I was reading because I'm terrible. I just get the general gist of my idea. But I was thinking about, like, how you said like toxic culture. Most people go back in history when they think about crazy shit and they think about like World War II. But if you just look at like the generational kind of mayhem that's kind of gone on, it's sort of no wonder that like we're wired, like you said, like not even from that idea of generational like trauma through like your nervous system and stuff, but just like even in like our psychology of like fear and just how we've evolved psychologically to be so protective, and some of the ideas that we have, because that's what I hear people saying when they talk about like the youth crime stuff. They just can't conceptually get past the idea like, how can you just like let these kids get away with it? They just can't get past that idea.
It's like get away with it, like punishing them, in that sense. Like a healthy approach would be not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. How can we help? What's causing you to be like this? Why don't you experience human connection? Why do you lack empathy?
Yeah.
What are these kind of things? It's not, there's something wrong with you for lacking empathy and doing this stuff. It's because that makes it about them, and it doesn't look at the context, the cause. It's more what happened to you that caused you to disconnect from empathy, and how can we as a culture and a community heal that, help these kids so they don't want to do that, so they can develop empathy, so they can care, so they can actually feel connection to other human beings. Because if you're in a space where you feel empathy and you feel connection to human beings, are you going to go rob someone? Like,
No.
no, like you're not, and those are inherent in humans. I don't believe that like those qualities of empathy, compassion, connectedness, being able to feel each other, and be connected in like a sense of unity with us,
Yeah.
community, common unity. That's inherent in all human beings. I don't believe anyone is born like a little baby infant. It's like they're a narcissist.
No.
They're a
Yes.
psychopath. That's a development, like some great work by Margaret Marlowe, like The Psychological Birth of the Human Infant. It's a book, and she talks about the development of our identity and our sense of self,
Yeah.
and how that kind of happens as we individuate and separate from our mother. And so I'm of the view that, psychopaths and narcissistic personality disorders, those kind of things, like antisocial behaviors and all that, those are developments, and they develop through environmental stimulus. They develop because of certain circumstance that create them, and then the system gets oriented around survival. The nervous system starts to orient from different energies based on protection, based on antisocial behaviors, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
And so it's not about the person.
Yeah.
It's the trauma soup that has birthed this development, and it's
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah.
You listen to politicians talk about this stuff, it's like, it's so fucking toxic. The way they talk about it, it's like, that's the reason this is being created, that those perspectives that are being preached, drenched into our brains, from a young age, and that kind of punishing, shameful kind of attitudes towards communities and people and children. And it's much larger than just some kids doing crime.
Mm. And it's hamstrung to fail. You're right. Like and to be honest, I don't know what the answer is, because like in saying all that, you could look at other systems around the world, and our structure is a lot better than a lot of other places. But even still, I agree with you. It's really terrible. But it's hamstrung to fail because yeah, because because it just reinforces at the end of the day, politicians will come back to saying whatever. They'll never go the whole hog because they want to get the votes, and
Yeah, exactly.
they
Yeah,
want to be re-elected.
that's the issue. And the issue is self-centered consciousness.
Yeah.
And we can't actually step out of self-centered consciousness as a decision centered from within self-centered consciousness.
Yeah.
It's like it's a self-perpetuating loop. Any decision we make from within the ego structure perpetuates the ego structure. You can't. And so any decision we make from within those systemic loops of thinking perpetuates those systems. That's why if we have a revolution, and we tear down the government and change our culture and rearrange all the systems, the same thing will end up happening.
Yeah.
The new leaders will become corrupt because it lives within our consciousness. We actually need a transformation of human consciousness itself. And that's not up to us. It's like if humans were going to grow wings, it's up to evolution, up to life to evolve us. We don't just get to decide, oh, I want to evolve. It's like, that's why we're stuck. It's like life, the intelligence, you could say the universe, God, whatever source, the intelligence that grows a tree, the intelligence that grows a plant, the intelligence that moves the tides in and out, that revolves the planet around the sun, that does everything in the universe, that beats our heart, grows our fingernails, digests our food. Like, we don't do any of that. There's a governing intelligence there. It's up to that governing intelligence whether our consciousness evolves.
Yeah.
And, like, we're doomed, in a sense, like out of the bind we're in. We have to kind of, and that's where surrender comes in. We have to learn to surrender to that will. And it comes back to that recovery quote, life on life's terms. Like, life's terms means we're surrendered to that governing intelligence. And the deeper we surrender to that intelligence, the more our consciousness starts to transform and gets inspired, influenced by the totality. And then only then can we create new ideas. Otherwise, we're just repeating the same thing in disguise as something else.
Yeah. Man, it's so for everybody listening, I wish I had like some sort of like sound effects fucking thing going on my keyboard here, because this is why I like talking to Matt, because he's a very deep thinker. Have you always, and when you're talking, I'm like, yeah, 100%. Have you always been this like kind of deep in your thinking, or has this been something that's kind of developed off the back of, I guess like challenging, difficult experiences in your life?
Yeah, look, like I've always kind of thought outside the box. And I think for people who think outside of that, who have a different perception of consciousness, like I was really into psychedelics from a young age.
Yeah.
And, I don't believe psychedelics are the same class as all the other drugs. They, I don't think they should come in under addictive substances, et cetera, et cetera. So I was experimenting with them from a young age. I was always interested in kind of transforming consciousness. Like I used to shoot ice in my room by myself and watch documentaries on yoga and like all spiritual kind of like state, meditate, do yoga by myself and in Tai Chi and all that, like off my face on ice all night by myself.
Did you ever try and do like Tai Chi or yoga, like flying?
Yeah. Or, I'd take acid by myself and stay up all night, like meditating. Sometimes feel like I was going to go insane, but like I always was interested in consciousness, and how consciousness transforms, even when I was like at the depths of my using.
Yeah. So funny, man. For anybody that's ever shot ice, I just cannot imagine trying to do Tai Chi. Anyway, so it's interesting. I once made a joke like at a I don't know, I was speaking at a conference where with like at a matrix conference, let's call it that, like where everybody's like just fully in the system and whatever. And I said like flippantly, we should, because I do some stuff sometimes where just sometimes get around politicians and get the opportunity to talk to them and stuff. And I just made a joke like that it would be funny to slip like some MDMA or like a mushroom cap in their drink or something. And everybody laughed, but like I was kind of serious, because it does need something. You're right. It is like, it comes back to that internal battle, which makes it so interesting, even though it's like affecting so many other people.
Yeah.
Decisions. Yeah.
Well, so like I have always kind of been like that, but we kind of naturally, organically came onto this through telling my story and youth crime, and the conversation naturally evolved. But like, that extremity, like I've always been a kind of extremist, sense, like I'd dive headfirst into something.
Yeah.
Drugs were kind of no different. And, I was in so much pain when I was using. Like by the end, like Like I said to my mum once, it's if I don't have like a 1/7 of heroin in my arm every day, it's like I've walked into a room and found my whole family dead. You
Yeah.
know, like unbelievable activated panic.
Yeah.
And I was either in that or chronic shutdown and depression. And knowing what I know now, my nervous system was swinging between survival responses. My
Yeah.
whole system had adapted to live in either fight or flight or freeze or collapse.
So how do you heal from that intense pain? How do you get through that?
Um, it's a journey. It's not, in my experience, and this is what I do as a profession now. I work with trauma with people and train other therapists to work with trauma. Um, like I say, trauma healing is not about fixing something that's broken. Like you don't go to a therapist and like they give you a therapeutic paracetamol. It makes your headache go away, makes your trauma go away. Like it doesn't work like that. It's more like we actually have to shift our lifestyle. We have to shift our awareness. We have to shift our consciousness. We have to actually work with the body.
Yeah.
Uh, Trauma healing when it comes to um, the nervous system, it's like talking about it, going to a therapist and talking about it doesn't do anything, can actually make it worse and re-traumatize us. It
100%.
beds the neurophysiology of the trauma. Like I went to psychotherapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, and I told the story of my trauma over and over and over again. And by the end, I was being told by these psychs, like, we think you've healed from it, because I was completely frozen and dissociated. Nothing would come up. It was just a story. It was like nothing.
Yeah.
And, I'm not against 12-step programs or anything like that, but we can actually do that to ourselves by sharing our story over and over again. It causes us to dissociate from the emotions,
Yeah.
from the felt sense in our body, and our body can go into a freeze response, what's called chronic freeze, get stuck in that, where our story doesn't bring anything up for us anymore. So I was just telling this story, really fucked up violence, death, like dead bodies and all that sort of stuff from my
Yeah.
youth, and nothing would come up.
Yeah.
And I convinced myself, oh, maybe I've worked through it all, but it was all locked and frozen within my body, within the nervous system itself.
Yeah.
And so when I started to do somatic work, with
And somatic means like in the body, right? Yeah.
the felt sense of the body. So I was working with my trauma therapist. So I went to rehab 17 times, and on the 17th time, like I knew I had to look at my trauma.
When people just sorry, when people do that, like people are going in for like the 17th time, and this is not about the people going in for the 17th time. It's more about the people around them. I always like wonder, like, do people think like to themselves, this isn't working? Like maybe we got maybe 17, like the 15th time. Fuck, maybe we better do something different with this guy.
Exactly. And you know what they do, and this is just the way human consciousness is oriented. There's something wrong with him because it's not working.
Yeah.
And that's how we get treated at schools and the education system and the workplace and the workforce and our culture in general. It's like if something's not working for us, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
It's not there's something wrong with the system, or maybe we need to change things. It's you're the problem. You don't want it enough. You're not dedicated enough. You don't care about yourself. You're self-centered, blah, 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 whatever it is, whatever reasons they come up with. But it was my fault, that I couldn't get recovery, that, I tried 17 times. But this time, like I knew 100% I needed to look at my trauma. I was sitting in Malvern Private Hospital, the rehab.
Yep.
And like I was detoxing from methadone, Xanax, heroin, fucking everything.
Yep.
So uncomfortable. Like I had so much trauma around detoxing. Like
man, particularly those that mix of drugs, Xanax and methadone in particular, or other opiates. Probably physically, the two worst. Oh, and probably alcohol as well. But yeah, the two, three worst.
Seizures, and my heart had stopped, and like I'd always have constant panic attacks when I was coming off them. So I was dealing with that. But two of my last friends had died, and one of them had been sentenced to prison for murder for 17 years. Whilst I was in rehab, he got that that
Wow.
sentence. And I remember,
And was that moment, sorry to interrupt, was that moment sadness for him, or was it or as well as that, or separate to that, was it a real moment for you where you were like, holy fuck, where you kind of saw the two directions of your life
yeah,
going?
it was a panic.
Yeah.
Like, went into panic. Like, as I knew it was going to happen. He was in remand for a long time, and but he finally got sentenced. And I went into panic because the panic was I'm alone. Like, I don't have anyone left out there.
So was that kind of like your running mate, like using? Yeah.
One of them, yeah, one of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
And like I just knew it was like a visceral, full body insight. We could say it came from that governing force. That if I don't get clean this time, I'm gonna die.
Yeah.
It was like I knew it, and we say that, but usually it's like, oh, you'll die if you go back out there. But
Yeah.
usually people have a fair few runs left in them. It's like I knew I'd exhausted all options. I was 58 kilos, 6 foot. I had Hep C. I was overdosing almost every time I used. Hey.
So and
Um,
and for everyone listening, like, sometimes I'm with you. Like sometimes people say these things and it's kind of true, but it's not.
it's a potential.
It's a potential. It's a potential. It's not. But like to be honest, with Matt, when I saw him, and that was even maybe like a month or two after
Yeah, I
you
was in.
sort of
Yeah,
settled down a little bit. I remember distinctly. I hope you don't mind me sharing this, but
okay.
you were just on like so much medication and kind of just like drug fucked, I guess.
Yeah,
That like because you were like rapping at the time or something, and you were
oh,
doing
yeah.
you were doing a rap, and like you just like there was a point with like your cognition where you'd like go too fast, and then you just like kind of weren't like talking properly. You know what I mean?
Making no sense. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
one of those users who'd have like drool
That's
or
right. And you were dribbling. Yeah, I didn't want
yeah,
to.
yeah. And I used to eat handfuls of Xanax and let them dissolve in my mouth because you'll kick in quicker, kind of thing. And
And
like the
they and for
Xanax,
anybody that's had like real Xanax, because I think it's fake these days, that tastes
yeah,
like shit.
yeah.
Like it makes you want a munt.
Yeah, I used to just put them in and let them dissolve, and I'd have Xanax dribbling down my face. And I used to wear like 3 pairs of tracky pants and like 2 jackets just to keep myself warm because I was so skinny. Even in summer, and I realize now it was a protective mechanism, like to give me a buffer between me and the world, like add
Yeah.
some layers on. And so I was a mess. And like when I was in rehab that time, my arm didn't work because I'd nodded off on it for 8
Ah,
hours, and the nerve had stopped working, so I couldn't move my hand, I couldn't do a signature, I couldn't write, nothing. And like I remember getting to rehab just you know so off my face and trying to get the dessert, like falling into the dessert, my hand coming into like jelly dessert thing, and someone helped me back to my room. And like I was a mess. And so that what happened when that happened with my friend, I went into panic, and it was like I could kind of see everything for the first time, like
right.
clarity.
Yeah.
And wow, how the fuck? It's like, how did I get here?
Yeah.
Like where I am right now. How did all that happen? It's like the whole thing was autopilot. I didn't
So
have.
why that time? Do you think because you were just so spent, like absolutely spent, or just divine intervention, or like
I think it's when we're the most spent, when we're the most, um, when the energy of the self is so depleted, grace can step in.
yeah.
Out of the way. So it was both divine intervention due to being so spent.
Yeah.
You're on death's door, you see the light, kind of thing.
100%. Yeah.
And then for the next few weeks, like detoxing, I remember every night my head just like begging me to leave, and I wasn't sleeping. That was almost the worst part, like making it through each night.
Yeah.
Um, just because the detox was so terrible, and like just begging. I remember laying in bed, my head just like, just leave, go use, like please. And I just had to kind of sit with it, and stay with it. And
Was this at Malvern?
yeah,
Do you
yeah,
know
yeah,
the one for me? Because I kind of had this similar thing in the first few days when I was there. Fuck, I remember, and I was in a room that was like kind of close to the back car park,
yeah, yeah.
And the fucking train station is right there.
Yeah.
Darling, is it Darlinghurst? I think it is. And I used to hear the train at nighttime when I was fucking going through the head miles, and I just think, just fucking get out of here and get on that train. You know what I mean? Like that's what
Yeah, it does. It begs. And, we talk about it like it's, the disease is at the time, this is the way it was being framed as the disease doing push-ups. It wants to kill you. Rah, rah, rah. It's like that to me is not helpful to a traumatized nervous system, because that creates a projection of some entity inside me that's a threat and wants to kill me. It's like that part of me, it's like a much more compassionate and understanding approach. That part of me is just trying to survive. It's completely traumatized. And the only way it knows how to soothe itself was through opiates and benzos and drugs. That's the only way my nervous system knew how to regulate itself. So I spent my life in chronic fight or flight or chronic shutdown and freeze. The only way, so a healthy nervous system will self-regulate out of survival responses. So we go up into fight or flight, or we go down into freeze, collapse. A healthy nervous system will regulate out of that.
Right.
So, for example, and it can be even little things, everyday things that we don't really see as threats to survival. This is the difference between developmental trauma and, say, shock or acute trauma. Shock or acute trauma is like a mortal threat in the moment, a tiger running at us, a bomb going off, someone coming with a knife, etc. Developmental trauma is much more insidious and pervasive and normalized. And so if we put our hand up in class and ask a question, say in grade 1, and everyone laughs at us, stupid question, and we get that contraction in the gut that says, you fucking idiot. Like, why question? Everyone knows that experience. Our face goes red. It's like a full body, visceral experience. It's not just a thought. Like our system goes into shutdown. So that, is potentially a dorsal vagal response, depending on the person, their sensitivity and their response. But everyone knows that kind of experience in different situations. That moment our system contracts, if someone's there and supports us through it, like an empathic witness takes our hand and says, it's safe. It's okay. Everyone just laughed. It's over now. That contraction, that stress contraction will regulate itself. It's actually through thousands of experiences of contraction, relax, stress, relax, stress, relax through childhood, especially the first 3 years in infancy, that our system learns to self-regulate these emotions. If we don't get that in our childhood because mum and dad are dysregulated, or they're shamed, or we're left in a room to cry, etc., then that stress never learns to relax.
Got it.
And so, I spent my life in these chronic states. My nervous system never learned to self-regulate. It never learned stress, relax, stress, relax. It just learned stress. If it had have learned to self-regulate, drugs wouldn't have been needed, and it's kind of like, sitting in that room, my head begging me, it was begging me for regulation. It was actually, on a very unconscious level, begging for support. My mum's support when I was a baby, for my dad's, for my teachers, etc., so it could come back to relax. It was begging for safety. Heroin became the only way I could do that. And, like my own experience, and you will resonate with this. I'd be in your own way, I'd be in heroin withdrawals, and I'd be in this panic, and I'd jump in the car, full ball to the dealer's house, driving through red lights, like fucking sweating, snot, dry reaching, trying not to shit my pants, and just like hell in opiate withdrawals. I'd then get it. As soon as I'd get there, something would start relaxing. I'd get out of the car,
100%.
Get it, put it in my pocket. I wouldn't even need to use it.
Correct. Yeah.
So the heroin isn't the problem, because I hadn't even used it, and I was still in opiate withdrawals. The problem was my nervous system stuck in an unbelievably stressed state, unable to come out of it. The heroin became my only resource. Any way to come out of stress.
And isn't it true when you're using like that, you get to a point where the moments before you use is better and more exciting than being high.
It's that relief, like, oh, it's here. It's like, oh, if the dealer's not answering, and then they finally answer. It's like, oh,
Yeah, that's right.
You know, it's like, and then that's the regulation. And so my mind, my actual whole nervous system, you know, that disease doing push-ups in the back room was actually just my nervous system seeking support and regulation the only way it had adapted to know how.
Yeah.
Through its environment, through its childhood. And so a healthy nervous system goes into stress and can come out, can regulate out of stress. And some people say, oh, but I, you know, wasn't stressed when I was using it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm of the perspective that these sort of people, you know, are dissociated from their physical body. You know, like we live as a cult. It's stressful to be in our culture. It's stressful to fucking get to year 12 and to think, fuck, like I've got to get a job, and you know, like there's stress coming at us from every direction, but it's like an air conditioner that's always on. You don't notice it anymore. It's
Yeah.
only when the air conditioner turns off, the power goes out. Oh wow, there was so much noise in here.
Mm.
So when something becomes integrated and normalized in our experience, different levels of stress, we don't even realize we're stressed.
Yeah.
I'm of the perspective that, you know, say everyone has developmental trauma in the sense they have personality traits that are caused by developmental arrests that then limit the way they function in the world. So, you know, someone who puts their hand up in class gets laughed at, you know, their system doesn't know how to self-regulate. They never had the support. They never had the resource to come out of stress. So then, you know, after that, the next time they go to put their hand up, their system freezes, don't do it.
Yeah.
And then that might you know, create kind of unconscious beliefs as it's not safe to be me. It's not safe to talk. So then that experience happening over and over again, kind of building on itself in different ways, you know, then I might have to do a talk and I get fucking anxious about it, you know, because of that experience. My nervous system's reverting that back to that incomplete fight or flight response. And then I make a fool of myself. So then it embeds that. And then I become an anxious person. I'm disconnected. I can't talk to people properly. It's kind of becomes personality traits.
Yeah.
So, you know, not only do I have this experience, but it becomes a part of my personality. My personality has now adapted and is oriented around certain belief structures and stress states that now limit how much I can connect with people, limit how much, you know, I can't put my hand up in class, you know,
Yeah.
1,000 different ways that shows up in my life. So that trauma has now become embedded and a part of me and a way that I function and am oriented in the world. And, you know, so everybody has that to varying degrees. And we could say, well, okay, why isn't everyone an addict? Well, everyone is in their own way. They just might not use drugs or alcohol.
Yeah.
Everyone has some sort of vice or behavior that helps them to regulate their nervous system, unless they had a really healthy development and their nervous system can self-regulate.
Yeah.
But everyone has something, you know, it becomes NA meetings. They become the way we self-regulate. More healthy. You know, we could say it's more healthy, you know, but it's the same cycle. Or you know, people scrolling on Facebook or work or the gym or obsessed with their diet, obsessed with their weight, obsessed with their looks, all the other things we see in society happening.
So I've
One's
got, sorry.
just functional, you
Yeah.
know, functional within society versus dysfunctional within society. And we draw an imaginary line and say, this is okay and this isn't. One's a criminal act.
Comes back to that cultural thing. Yeah.
One's celebrated, but it's the same mechanism. And it's what Buddha spoke about 2,500 years ago when he said, all suffering is craving and aversion.
Yeah.
In the wheel of samsara, that's what addiction is.
Interesting. So interesting. So I've got 1,000 questions. Do you have a little bit more time? So, couple of things I want to ask you. We might just start there because we're talking about it. But so if they're the same mechanisms, people are drawing those imaginary lines. How do people tell when they're healed or when things are healthy? Like, what does it look like if it's healthy, and how do you know?
I don't think there's like this end place where we're perfect. Like I don't believe in an ideal where like some finish line we cross of we're enlightened kind of thing, or perfectly healthy and don't have any human frailties or addictions, et cetera, et cetera. I think they're a part of our human experience, you know. Some have more consequences than others, and some of those consequences are set up because of cultural misunderstandings around addiction. Like heroin shouldn't be a criminal act, Yeah.
How stupid. Just quickly, how fucking dumb. Like when you actually sit down as a rational person and think through that, like I'm not even just like from a bias leaning.
No.
It's just like the stupidest shit to like
Well, and especially because
criminalize.
it's like the pharmaceutical kind. I don't know if you watched the Painkiller
No, I
show.
haven't. I haven't watched it. I
But
was
it's
looking
like,
at it last night actually.
it's insane, pushing OxyContin. That's heroin,
Yeah,
pretty much like it's heroin.
pretty much just as bad.
What they did, like they'd manipulate doctors, they'd get young, good-looking girls to go into the doctors to tell them to prescribe OxyContin. They'd give them bonuses. That to me is far more criminal because they're lying. They're telling you, like, you go to a
Yeah,
heroin, you're getting heroin. They're not selling it to you as a medication that's going to help you and is, when they release Xanax, it's a non-addictive alternative to barbiturates.
yeah.
So who did that turn out to be? It's and they fucking lie. So that's far
Well,
more criminal.
the biggest thing is just alcohol, like,
Yeah.
and like you're talking about, it's just people's perception.
Yeah.
If you talk about it like from a toxicology point of view,
Worse. Yeah.
it's worse. Alcohol is like fucking poison in your body.
Yep.
Like it's
Yeah,
literally you're literally just poisoning yourself. Whereas other drugs actually isn't that. If it was in its like purest form, and all that sort of stuff. So anyway, but yeah, sorry, we got a bit sidetracked, but
yeah. Cool. Well, it comes back to like, what does healthy look like? Well, there's a quote. I don't know who said it, and I always quote it. I should probably look it up. It's like all of humanity's issues stem from man's inability to sit in a room by himself with no distractions without going crazy.
Yeah.
And that ability to sit with myself, to be with myself, I'm not of the view that we shouldn't experience stress. I think stress is healthy. It's when stress turns into chronic stress and we're unable to come out of stress that it becomes toxic.
Yeah.
And so if I have a capacity and my window of tolerance has grown enough for me to meet what comes up for me throughout life and self-regulate, so for example, if I have stress, if I have anger at my kids, if I have this or that come up, triggers, whatever, life happens, if I have a capacity to stay embodied and so associated in my humanity, fully inhabit my humanity without going up into storytelling, without disassociating, etc. If I can stay with my experience and stay present in the now with my experience, ride that wave of stress, come back down to calm and safe, then that's a self-regulating nervous system, one that can actually develop the capacity to do that.
That makes sense. And that's a really good baseline to work off. So the other thing I was going to ask you is, because there's so much, as I said off the top, Matt, I remember, it's probably getting over 5 years ago, like probably closer to like 7 years ago, like Matt was like fully talking to me about this stuff.
Yeah.
Is that roughly how long, like straight off the bat, as soon as you started working in this space, like you were going down this track, and since then, so it's probably, it might even be longer than that, but since then, it's kind of I think become a bit diluted because everybody's talking about it, and maybe people don't have the deep expertise, or they have. It's like anything. Yeah.
When everyone starts talking about it, that's when I tune out to things most.
Yeah.
That's when things get diluted. They get not only diluted, distorted. Everyone's an expert. Right. It's like I've actually devoted my life to this long before it was popular. And it's like I said, trauma healing is not about fixing something that's broken. And it's also not about understanding anything conceptually. It's a lifestyle. It's a way of living, it's an embodied moment to moment practice, or you could call it an embodied moment to moment yoga.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what it takes to heal the nervous system, because we have to readapt. Different areas of the brain are larger in people with trauma, like the amygdala's fight, flight, freeze. What governs fight, flight, freeze is much larger. Our nervous system adapts in different ways. That doesn't just happen like that. And this is the truth. People don't want to hear this either, because it's like we're all into quick fixes in the West.
That's right. So, and that's the thing I wanted to ask you, because of that dilution. When I talk to people, I see a lot of people, not that they have the wrong idea, but they're just kind of confused, or they don't have the full like conceptual understanding. So can you explain what it, and you sort of have already kind of talked about it a little bit, but you know how like when people talk about um traumas, like it creates like an imprint
Yeah.
on the body, like, so, and you talked about the difference between acute like traumatic experiences and developmental trauma. So can you talk us through like how that happens, and actually like how trauma gets stored in your body? You know, that's kind of like a meme, like trauma stored in your body. Like
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
how does that actually play out? Like, and how would you explain that to someone if you were trying to talk them through it?
Sure. So look, like trauma can happen on a preconceptual level, preconscious level even, it can happen before the infant becomes self-conscious.
Yep.
So when there's a threat, it comes from, our nervous system, and our nervous system happens on a preconscious and precognitive level. And by that I mean it doesn't require any conceptual understanding. It doesn't even require us to be conscious of it. It's in the same way that when we're asleep and our heart beats by itself, we're not
Yep.
conscious. It happens on a preconscious level and precognitive level. Trauma happens in the same way. So our nervous system is sensing our environment constantly.
Yep.
And so it's like as a kid, you walk into a room and your dad's there, say your dad's away, it's quite, your dad's anger,
Yep.
it's like familiar to you. You walk into a room, he's facing the other way, reading the paper. You've just walked in, he doesn't notice you're there. You can viscerally sense he's in a bad mood.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. Yeah.
You can viscerally sense it. You walk into
The
a room.
spidey sense tingles. Yeah.
That's right. That actually happens as an adaptation because the nervous system goes on hypervigilance to try to protect itself, so it's kind of emotional monitoring, of people. It happens on a preconscious level.
Yeah.
Right? You walk in and your nervous system picks it up and the information goes up into your mind and says, oh, he's angry. Then that's the moment you become conscious of it. Your nervous system is conscious of it.
Is that similar to the gut feeling, like that kind
Yeah.
of concept? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And so I'm of the perspective that it's bottom up processing, So like when a trauma happens, our nervous system responds and then it goes up into our minds after that. I'm not of the view that our thoughts so much create our emotions and our experience. It's actually our nervous system that senses and processes and organizes our experience that then goes up into our cognition. So Deb Dana, who has worked a lot with Stephen Porges, the developer of polyvagal theory, that talks about the different branches of the vagus nerve and how it responds to the environment. She says,
just quickly tell us about the vagus nerve. What's the vagus nerve?
Vagus nerve is the largest nerve in the body. It has a few different branches. It governs sympathetic, fight or flight, dorsal vagal, freeze, shutdown, collapse, etc. It's very sciencey, neurosciencey.
Got it.
It's just basically the nerve that governs that. And she says story follows state, and that just sets it up nicely. So the nervous system state will then affect the story.
Mm-hmm.
And so to put it simply, an environmental stimulus happened, a threat happens. And in childhood, that can just be dad's anger, mum's stress. It can also be about what didn't happen. No one was there to pick us up from school. No one was there to hold our hand and say, you're safe, when I felt embarrassed after asking a stupid question. And so the nervous system spikes into a stress response. It never completes, and it happens on that preconscious level. So the nervous system gets stuck because it doesn't have the capacity or the support, the adult support, to come out of it. And so an infant can't regulate its nervous system. It needs a healthy adult to regulate through co-regulation. When that gets stuck, that's an imprint. And that imprint will have a specific stress response, fight or flight, and it will have associated images and memories associated with it. And then that gets imprinted in the nervous system and then develops from there. So shock trauma might be someone runs at me with a knife, or I'm in a car accident, and terror happens in the car accident, and rage happens, and say my kids are in the car. I was in a car accident recently with my kids, actually.
Shit.
Yeah, bad one too, but we're all right. But in that moment, I might have rage at the other driver. I might have my own terror. I might have grief come up, but my kids need tending to, so it will all lock in the nervous system. then those survival emotions get stuck recycling. They don't discharge and they don't integrate. So that experience then becomes, the next day, that past experience is then being experienced now continuously. And that's what trauma is. It's like running on a treadmill. When you get off the treadmill, it still feels like you're running. A part of you still going.
Yep.
It's like that
100%.
with you the next day. And it's not just in your mind. It's actually the whole nervous system stuck processing in that state.
Got it. And is it kind of like for people to imagine it like a glitch in the computer where it just kind of keeps repeating.
It's a loop. Yeah, it's a loop. And often they go unconscious.
Yeah.
And then any kind of, environmental stimulus that has any similarity to that will trigger it up. Someone who's in a car accident might go to get in a car and go into panic. It's the terror, the unprocessed terror that they haven't felt. Say, for more developmental trauma is more about how the personality develops. It's also acute stress in childhood, but say, I develop patterns of people pleasing, of looking after other people. I don't have boundaries. I'm unable to say no. Those are personality traits that develop in childhood in relationship to our parents, caregivers, whoever our main caregivers are, and to, just adults as a whole, but mainly them. And then I'm in an adult relationship, and my partner will always have similar personality traits to my primary caregivers. And my nervous system senses that and will go into those incomplete survival responses and become personality traits. So we're just reliving these adaptations, these reactions, unprocessed reactions over and over and over again. And I'm of the view that most people walk around on autopilot 99% of the time, just living out reactions.
Yeah. No
conscious awareness at all.
It's really interesting. And a lot of things that you say there just puts the reasoning behind some of those like weird and mysterious psychological phenomenons that happen, like when people say you marry your mum or you marry your dad or whatever,
Marry the unresolved traits, like you marry the traits that were the most triggering that your personality adapted and oriented around. And then she's not your mum, but there's specific personality traits that will then trigger your adaptations. And it might come out as rage. It might come out as terror. It might come out as like fawning, having no boundaries, letting them make all the decisions, whatever it is, specific personality traits will come out. And, it's a lot of relationships are actually just that kind of trauma bonding.
Yeah.
It's unresolved childhood issues. And then it's also like mummy and daddy, that kind of, I need you, those unresolved. And what we're doing then is just living out addiction. That's how codependency plays in, because we're looking for the other person to become the source of regulation for our nervous system. They become the drug, like, they make me bring us back to that sense of safety. So we lose, again, the capacity to self-regulate. And just, this is how it's imprinted on our nervous system, just to come back to that basic point. It lives in our body. Yep. It's like a hammer hitting your knee. It's a reaction of the whole of the physiology, of the biology, of the actual organism. It's not just in the mind. And this is where the West has screwed up massively, is it split the mind off from the body. And I know this, like, there's so much neuroscience, and working with people, rather than trying to change their thinking about something, you change their physiology and their thinking follows.
And that's what I wanted to ask you, because I've heard you talk about this a lot. And again, I think it's another thing that's diluted. So trauma gets stored in the body. You explain that. So then why is it important? Like people will say in the trauma healing process, like identify where it is in your body. And people often say, fuck, I can feel it in my chest or my arm or my throat or whatever. Like, so why is that important to do? And I guess, like, how do you actually change your state and down regulate? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing you kind of say is that you get out of the story and you almost don't even really talk about the story. You just focus on changing the state.
Yeah, well, like, you can talk about the story, but not at the expense of the state.
Got it.
It's like, not if it's dissociating from the body.
Yeah.
Like the trauma lives as stress contractions in the felt sense, in the body. Remember I spoke about like that knot I carried as a child?
Yep.
I remember waking up in rehab and having that same knot, like, fuck, I've got to face the day.
Yeah.
Like not using, like I'm in fucking rehab, and just that it's like impending dread, like unbelievable dread. And it lived as this knot, like this Gordian grip in my
Yep.
belly. Like, no, like I don't want to be here. If you have words, that would be it. Something terrible is going to happen. Um, it's like we can change all the thinking, but that's like trying to heal a broken leg by talking about it, by thinking about it.
Yep.
My leg's still going to be broken. I can reframe it. I can try to change my perspective, etc. All of that has its place. I'm not against doing any of that kind of stuff. I do that with my clients, but not at the expense of actually looking directly at the broken leg.
Yep. Yep.
Otherwise it further dissociates us. And so what I help people do is develop that capacity to be with that knot, to metabolize it, to move it through, and there's something called our window of tolerance. So a lot of trauma healing modalities and people, practitioners, etc., they will like kind of turn the tap on that knot, bring up that activation and flood the sink. That's not helpful. It's it re-traumatizes the nervous system. Someone might have a big spew, a big release, and then, oh, I feel so much better, but nothing integrates. Their window of tolerance hasn't grown, and then they find themselves in the same patterns again not long after everything's back. People do this when they go take ayahuasca or breath work or anything like that. They have a big release, they find a bit of regulation, because I call it spewing, like emotional spewing, and then, I need to go do breath work again. So it becomes that same loop. Their system isn't learning to self-regulate.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I work with people, it's more, you turn the tap on a little bit,
Yep.
develop a tolerance, a resilience to that pressure, that activation. So
It's like going to the gym. Like,
yeah,
you
exactly.
slowly build up the weight that you can lift. You don't just go and lift fucking 100 because you're going to do
Yeah,
an injury.
exactly. And it comes back to that quick fix it attitude in the West. Like,
Yep.
and practitioners wanting to look like they're doing something amazing, and money and all of that bleeds straight through the trauma space, especially now it's become a thing.
Yeah.
And you turn it on a bit, you develop resilience, capacity, and then you turn it off, and then you come back to safety, regulation, and then you turn it on again. And so we're developing that stress, relax, stress, relax, stress, relax. And we're teaching the system to self-regulate. And this is a process. It's ongoing. It's not, you never get to a point where you're perfectly self-regulating, maybe there will be one day, in like as humans evolve, and as our physiology evolves. But so we be with that knot in a way that isn't overwhelming. We touch on it, we befriend it, we get used to it. We turn towards the very thing we've been sprinting 100 k's away from our whole life. And as we turn the tap on a bit, we develop that capacity, that resilience to it, and our window of tolerance grows, and then we turn it off, and our system learns to self-regulate, discharge stress and self-regulate, discharge stress and self-regulate. And so, especially with developmental trauma, it's so important. We can't bypass that process of a system that never learned to self-regulate. If we're just spewing out stress, having big releases, it bypasses that. Our window of tolerance doesn't grow, our resiliency doesn't grow, the system doesn't just automatically start self-regulating. It has to be taught that, because it was never taught that through co-regulation with a healthy adult in childhood. And so trauma lives as those felt senses. And, as a species, we're so dissociated, into thinking, cognitive, our experience, storytelling, and it becomes this veil that we see reality through. We can't actually see reality anymore. We only see our thoughts about reality.
And that's the funny thing about the human experience, is that fundamentally we are storytellers to ourselves and to the rest of the world. And it's our greatest power, but it's also our greatest Achilles heel, I think, as well.
Well, it's not reality, it's not actuality.
Yeah.
it's a filter, and there's nothing wrong with that filter. It's almost like we can almost call it a map of reality, but when the map possesses the host, it becomes problematic when we believe, like, I've got a map of Texas, and that map, I look at it and I think that's Texas. It's like, no,
Yeah.
it's not. It's a map.
Yeah.
And then I look at the map and I think I know everything about Texas, but I forget that it's the actual walking on Texas that is actuality. The immediacy of my feet on the ground, of the earth, of feeling it beneath my feet, of sensing it roll around me. It's nothing to do with the story I'm telling myself about it. So we get
Yeah.
disconnected from present moment experiencing because we're filtering it. And so trauma healing, in a sense, can be looked at as a kind of meditation, present moment, sensing my immediate experience. And it's only through coming down, I can only come into the felt sense of my experience now.
Mm-hmm.
I can't come down into my body tomorrow or yesterday, or by telling myself a story about it, or by cognizing it, et cetera, et cetera. This is why I say, it's like it can become a moment to moment yoga practice, where it's like present moment awareness. I'm living in my body, or I'm developing the capacity to live in my body, to be embodied, to inhabit my human experience. And so when we're developing the tolerance to these sensations, these intense kind of energies in my system, I'm growing that window of tolerance to that activation and that stress, so I can remain living within my human experience as life unfolds. And it's only through developing the capacity to meet it that it starts to integrate. Experience starts to integrate, and then we're changing the timestamp in the nervous system from the past, transmuting the timestamp into presence.
Yeah.
Now,
Man, to be honest, again, I'm pumping you up a bit, but I mean it. Like, to me, you kind of explain it the best. I think, even like interviews that I've listened to with lots of other people about trauma, which I get why they do it, but it's a very like high level sort of conversation that people have, because I guess it's a lot to take in, but I really love how you're able to explain it and sort of digest the conceptual, theory of it, and explain how it's real and connect it for people, because that's what I find, that's what people struggle with. Like, they just, because of all the things that we've been talking about, our culture. Geez, the sun's really come in here. I look like I'm freaking so white. But yeah, just like because of culture and all this kind of stuff, people, do you find that as well? Like, people find it really hard to kind of take on and understand and internalize, some of these truths and realities about their experience and stuff like that. And you explain it so well.
It's a whole new worldview. It's a new way of looking at reality, our experience as a whole. We've been conditioned to believe it's a certain way. And then I start talking about all this, and I'm saying, well, actually, no, it's this way.
Yeah.
It's a big step to kind of take, and often people hear this stuff as well, then they go out into their lives and forget about it and live according the old models still orient them. It's not their fault. They just kind of slip back into unconsciousness, go back asleep, and it's not a thing anymore. And it's like Gabor Mate, he said, I'm paraphrasing him here, I can't remember the exact conversation, but they'd have to change everything.
Yeah.
To integrate this. It wouldn't just be like the addiction treatment. It would be the education system, the way we parent, it would be the way our political systems work. If we were to really take this lens and this perspectives, these truths, and integrate them into the mental health industry, into the hospital system, into the education system, everything would have to change, because so much of what we do is perpetuating survival in the physiology. To actually heal as a world, it's like everything's going to have to transform. And like I said, we can't do that from within those survival adaptations, because the next decision we make will be based on survival.
Yeah.
Self-centered survival.
So interesting. So interesting. So where do you recommend people are listening to this? They've had a bit of a mind orgasm. They want to go from mental masturbation to action. like, where do you recommend people start? I guess both for if there's people listening to this that are going through addiction, or they're in, again, inverted commas, recovery. We'll have to get you back on because I didn't talk to you about half the shit that I had planned in my head. We just started talking. But yeah, they want to do some more healing and recovery from that side. But then also if there's like practitioners or therapists or whatever, like listening to this and they're going, fuck, I need some of this in my life. Like, where do people start from both those angles?
Like there's heaps of good like books and stuff you can kind of read about this stuff. If you're into kind of neuroscience and all that, like the work of Stephen Porges is great.
Yeah.
Heaps of mainstream trying to discredit him and all that, but it's like it's bullshit, as they do to anything that threatens them. But like the work of Peter Levine and somatic experiencing, he's got some great books. In an Unspoken Voice, Waking the Tiger,
Yeah.
books by him. Dr. Gabor Mate is one of my favorites. He's also, considered controversial, but it's controversial because it disagrees and challenges particular accepted views and narratives.
Yeah.
That's why it's controversial, but he's not at all controversial in my perspective. He's just telling the truth. Another one is Dr. Lawrence Heller and the neuroaffective relational model. He's got a great book, Healing Developmental Trauma.
Yep.
Brilliant book. And look, like, if you're interested, if you're a practitioner, we've got a somatic therapy training myself with the Center for Healing with Ryan Hassan.
Yeah.
I co-developed that with him. It's called Embodied Processing.
And I'll try and link Ryan's episode, because that was a while ago. I got to get him back on actually, but a lot of people talking similar stuff, and a lot of people resonated. So yeah, I'll link all this in the notes for people as well. Sorry, keep going.
All good. And look, like there is a lot out there, but it's at this stage it's considered more alternative perspective.
Yeah, still, isn't it? Yeah, still.
yeah, it is. And like I've read somewhere, it takes 17 years for sorry, my dog's snoring.
We can't hear it.
Takes 17.
That's the good life right there.
Takes 17 years for mainstream medicine and mainstream systems to catch up with neuroscience and like insight and all that sort of stuff. But there's would be particularly large resistance when it comes to this stuff, because the impact it would have to have if we really integrated it.
But I think at a fundamental level, what I've noticed has happened, say, from when I first started speaking to you about this, where if we had this conversation in depth when you first started talking to me about this stuff, like we'd have just been, and you probably were, you've just like way worse than it is now, a complete kook,
kook. Yeah.
But what I see happening now, and the reason why there is a lot more talk about it and there is a lot more information out there, is people, just the fundamental experience that they're having is what they're doing is not working. Like what you said.
Yeah, exactly.
Rehab 17 times,
Yeah, you get cornered into it,
That's right. That's
like
right.
you get checkmated over and over again. Like it's not fucking working. And that futility, it's like experiencing that futility over and over again. It erodes the defense structures, because there's defenses against seeing new perspectives and insights, because they challenge. And that's why we go into defense and threat. There's egoic structures, and when I say egoic, I don't mean, oh, you're in your ego, grandiose self kind of thing. I mean like the sense of a personality. That's like Freudian ego. There's defense structures that prevent us from gaining insight. It's actually like futility and being checkmated by life and fucking suffering, like, being spent, as we said earlier.
Yeah.
Being spent. It erodes those defenses, and we can actually, oh, wow, there's something over there. The light of awareness can actually gain insight and see something new. Grace, grace steps in when we're spent. And so, yeah, like I think as a species, we're more and more coming to that point, because it's like, it's too fucking painful to keep doing the same thing and believe in these concepts that haven't been working for us. And this, I'm not just talking about addiction, mental health, and trauma. I mean, collectively as a species. It's just not serving us anymore, and you can't just give them up. Like, you have to kind of be forced into it.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
But just like another thing, if you're looking at doing your own trauma healing, like I do work with people one-on-one still.
Yeah.
My website's mattk.com.au. The only issue is I am quite booked out. Like, I have a waiting list till January at this point, but there's a bunch of other practitioners, and maybe you can message Ryan to get our practitioner list, our embodied processing practitioner list. There's a bunch of that are personally trained to work with this stuff as well. Me and Ryan have trained them. They're certified by us, and went through our training. And they work with people one-on-one as well.
Awesome.
Otherwise, not just like to pump up our training. This isn't a sales pitch. There's many other kind of somatic modalities as well, like somatic experiencing, NAM, neuroaffective relational model. Hakumi, I think it is. I can't remember the exact name. Pretty sure it's Hakumi. There's lots of different somatic modalities. EMDR can be good for some people. Flash technique, anything that incorporates the felt sense of the body and helps to metabolize kind of undigested life experience that lives within us.
Yeah. And
unfortunately, we don't find this stuff in your average Medicare rebate practitioner.
EMDR is probably the only one, right?
Yeah, exactly. And just on a side note, a master's of psychology, a master's of counseling, a master's of psychiatry, a master's of social work, a master's of addictive behaviours, all of those put together, that's like 28 years of study, has less hours on trauma than our training.
Wow. There you go.
Yeah, so psychiatry gets, I think, 2 hours on trauma in their 10 years of study. Psychologists get 2 hours of trauma in their 6 years of study.
Wow.
Whereas our training has like hundreds of hours on trauma. So, when it comes, and these perspectives that we're talking about, so it's not their fault. It's just the way the system and education has developed. It's all about legalities, ass covering.
It's traumatized as well, man. It's traumatized.
Diagnosing disorders, looking at symptom clusters, ticking boxes from the DSM, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm of the view that 80% of diagnosis from the DSM, the Diagnostic Screening Manual, are developmental trauma-based or acute trauma-based. Personality disorders, all of that sort of stuff. I'm of the perspective that labeling someone with a disorder like that is not helpful. And the guy who, I think he wrote the 1990s or helped write it, DSM, saw an interview where they were talking about a quote. He said, we didn't look at the context. We created all these disorders, but we didn't ask the person what was going on in their life that created all these symptom clusters. And then we give it a name like bipolar, borderline, et cetera, et cetera. Reification, we believe that name is the thing. It's not actually real. It's just a person made up that label. They looked at a bunch of personality traits, slapped a label on it and said, this is what it is. Not necessarily, like, I'm not saying they don't exist in the sense bipolar isn't a real thing, borderline isn't a real thing. I'm saying the line between what's developmental trauma and what is actual bipolar or a personality disorder is so blurred. And I was misdiagnosed with so many things. So I'm blabbing on a bit about this, but I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, panic attack disorder, clinical depression, acquired brain injury, obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety disorders, and drug-induced psychosis. I was on 28 different antipsychotics, benzodiazepines, antidepressants, and opiates, and 27 different medications, and all those diagnoses. I am on no medication now, zero medication. I take melatonin at nighttime. And I take Ayurvedic herbs like ashwagandha and stuff I get from an Ayurvedic practitioner occasionally, only when I need them. And I don't have any of the symptoms of any of those diagnoses.
Wow. So interesting.
I was misdiagnosed. And so when I say it's blurred, never once was trauma mentioned. It's blurred between what's an actual personality disorder and what's developmental trauma.
This is the thing. I'll send it to you at some stage as well. Interestingly enough, he's the medical director at Malvern now. I don't think he was when you went through. He's a new guy, or not really new. He's been there for a couple of years now. Psychiatrist, but we had him on the podcast. Ali Kotler, his name is.
Ali. Yeah, he
Dr.
was.
Ali.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
he was. So he was saying something really interesting to me. We had him on the show. We're talking to him because I heard him give this talk at this conference. So interesting. And he basically told the whole conference that cognitive behavioral therapy is bullshit. He didn't say it like that.
On him. It's bullshit, you know.
He went into like he went into like, you know, like the research methodologies and all that kind of stuff. And because he's a psychiatrist, he holds authority. So the
Yeah,
message,
exactly.
like,
I
really,
say it, no one listens, you
that's
know.
right. That's right.
I call it cognitive bullshit therapy.
so he was saying that, and then on the podcast he was saying actually the thing with the DSM that people don't realize, and I might butcher this, I'll have to go back and listen to it properly. People go and listen to the episode. I'll link this as well. But he says that it's just a description of symptoms. It's not an actual
Thing.
like it's not an actual, what's the word? Diagnosis is the word, but even though it's called a diagnostic manual, it's not an actual like
Not an actual disorder. Like
disorder.
It's not a thing. And this is what I mean. It's reification where we make something real.
Yeah.
It's not real. It's like
all it's doing is describing symptoms is basically what he said.
Personality symptoms that we've then chucked an overarching label on these symptoms that says that's what these symptoms are. It's one thing, but really it's a cluster of potential symptoms. And all psychologist, doctor, etc. is trained to do is tick the boxes of those symptoms, diagnose a disorder, in the case of a psychologist or a doctor, give medication to then suppress the symptoms.
Yeah.
Nothing heals, nothing integrates, nothing transforms in the person. It's just about making them then functional within society.
Yeah.
Those symptoms are now suppressed from the medication. So they have a list, and so they're just ticking boxes, following orders, and it's, you know,
back to fitting into the cultural box.
Yeah,
that we
exactly.
want to
Make them normal again, you know, and it's not actually transforming the person. It's not healing the person, anything like that. Like this is, you know, I can probably get in trouble for saying this stuff, but fuck it, like it's the truth, you know.
Hey, we're just chewing gum on a podcast, you know, like it's chewing gum, chewing the fat, yeah. Hey, awesome, man. Thanks for coming on. As I said, we'll have to get you back in not too long because I actually wanted to talk to you about some other stuff as well. But
there's so much, mate. Like
great conversation. One of my favorite episodes for me personally to date. So thanks heaps, man. And I'll link all the stuff and have a good day, everybody. Peace.